Behind every big video game franchise in the video game industry is a dedicated team that puts their sweat, blood, and tears into a game's development. Within those teams, some game developers and designers quickly make a name for themselves for their involvement and overall interactions with the community. As we've seen time and time again, sometimes one person's name behind a project is enough to carry it to success. This is the story of a game created by an old school developer who worked on some of the biggest hits of the 90s and early 2000s. Viewed as a legend by many, as well as a veritable bad boy of the FPS genre, Bleszinski set out to take arena shooters back to its roots by any means necessary. Though the game was praised by critics, it struggled to make a splash in a genre heavily saturated with clones and franchises, and the game's old school business model failed to keep up in the modern age. This is the story of LawBreakers. LawBreakers is a first-person 5v5 arena shooter developed by Boss Key Productions. The game set itself apart from other shooters of its time by implementing things like a zero-gravity mechanic, which allowed players to slingshot themselves into the air, leading to chaotic and fast-paced situations, redolent of the past arena shooters the game draws inspiration from. On top of the zero-gravity mechanics, the game featured a class-based system with 9 different classes to choose from, ranging from the traditional offensive classes like the Enforcer, the game's equivalent of an assault class, to the traditional support classes like the Battle Medic. Along with a variety of game modes like Team Deathmatch and Capture the Flag, the game also had some different takes on game modes as well, such as the Overcharge mode, in which players must capture a battery and hold onto it for an extended period of time in order to gain a point. Overall, the game was well received by critics, with Eurogamer ranking it 39th on their top 50 games of 2017, calling it, quote, one of 2017's very best shooters, one that's inventive and full of boisterous energy. Unfortunately, despite all the positive feedback and reception for the game, it was never able to garner the kind of player base the developers had hoped. While the game peaked at 7,500 concurrent players during its closed beta in June of 2017, it would never hit those numbers again, and when it released on August 8, 2017, LawBreakers saw a steep drop to a peak of only 2,000 players, landing the game outside of Steam's top 100 most played games. That drop would continue steadily, and by the end of 2017, the game barely even had 100 players. So why are you just hearing about this game for the first time now? Why isn't it a household name like its creators had hoped? While there are a lot of reasons that contributed to the game's quick decline, it's time to go back and first talk about the aforementioned game director, Bleszinski. Bleszinski got his start in the game industry with Epic Games back in 1992, when he was working on a game called Jazz Jackrabbit. That game would become Epic Games' best-selling title at the time. Afterwards, he worked on the Unreal game series, which included Unreal Tournament, one of the most iconic FPS games of all time, and the title that LawBreakers drew most of its inspiration from. Bleszinski garnered a lot of attention for his work, and he graced the cover of PC Gamer in November of 2000, being heralded as one of the, quote, next gaming gods. To say the least, his already self-assured demeanor was only further inflated by the high praise, and he earned a reputation for being a bit cocky and even a bad boy. However, Bleszinski's best work was yet to come, and he would be the lead designer for the first 3 games in the Gears of War series, a series that became one of the best-selling franchises on the Xbox 360. Despite all of the success and fame he gained working under Epic Games, on October 3, 2012, Bleszinski announced his departure from the company after 20 years on the team. He would say in an interview that around the time of his departure, he was ready to permanently retire from the industry, saying, quote, it was a combination of gamers feeling jaded, as well as working with some very talented people who were also very jaded. I could pitch the most amazing idea to anybody back when I was at Epic toward the end, and they'd be like, I don't buy it. I don't mean to slag anyone, but people get jaded in this business. However, despite what appeared to be a retirement at the time, Bleszinski still remained somewhat present and made sure his opinions were heard, especially when it came to the FPS genre and the direction it seemed to be heading.
Los Angeles.
Yeah, I mean, are we talking like RPGs, classic, a point-and-click adventure type game? Are we talking first-person shooters?
First-person shooter.
Yeah?
Right? I mean,
Stick with what you know.
It's in my DNA.
Right.
And it's one of those things that a lot of these kids playing Call of Duty, I don't think they know what a proper arena shooter is.
Right.
They hit him across the head.
Eventually, on June 30th, 2014, he announced on Twitter that he was coming back, saying that he was starting a new studio called Boss Key Productions and put out some info about their upcoming game, the game that would eventually become LawBreakers. Unfortunately, The timing of this announcement coincided with another game's debut. Synchronous with news about LawBreakers coming out, rumors were swirling about a hero shooter from Blizzard Entertainment. Obviously, that shooter ended up being Overwatch. And unfortunately for Boss Key Productions, many fans focused on the class-based aspects of the game and naturally made a lot of comparisons to Overwatch. This was something that Bleszinski and the rest of the team tried to constantly move away from during the entire promotion of the game, but they could not get away from it. For the game's entire life cycle, LawBreakers tried in vain to escape the enormous shadow cast by Overwatch. But this wasn't LawBreakers' only issue. While the game was fun, it wasn't perfect. And due in part to Bleszinski's presentation of the game to the public and his attitude towards certain aspects of the game's development, those issues quickly turned people away from giving the game a chance. A prime example of this is the game's pricing model. While LawBreakers was originally advertised as a free-to-play game, Bleszinski said, quote, "We realized free-to-play wasn't the right fit for what we're building, and then began repeating that the game would be, quote, $29.99. None of that $60 multiplayer-only bullshit."
$29.99, none of that $60 multiplayer-only bullshit. $29.99.
Okay.
It's none of that $60 multiplayer-only bullshit. Right.
$29.99, none of that $60 multiplayer-only bullshit.
$29.99, none of that $60 multiplayer-only bullshit.
While the price was fairly reasonable, the move away from free-to-play likely caused a lot of people to never even give the game a proper chance. Another big issue was the matter of where the game was being released. Obviously, it came out on PC, and it also came out on PlayStation 4, but due to development constraints, it never made it to the Xbox One. This decision was baffling for many, as the Xbox was where Bleszinski made a name for himself with the Gears of War series. Considering the history there, an Xbox release almost felt like a no-brainer. Bleszinski responded to this in an interview.
PS4, PC, but no Xbox, right?
Yeah, and those Xbox fanboys are pretty salty.
Yeah, I mean, they supported you for a long time.
Oh, I believe the line on my Twitter feed was, "You're biting the hand that feeds," of the people that made you with Gears of War.
Yeah, so what do you say to that?
Well, the thing I want to say to them is, I'm not ruling out Xbox.
Yeah.
I have a studio of 65 people, and they can only do so much and work so hard, and we made a business decision looking at the install base of both consoles that PlayStation made more sense initially.
Yeah.
I'm not ruling out an Xbox version. Maybe there'll be a Scorpio version later with all sorts of bells and whistles and cool things. And maybe by that time, Rolls 10 and 11 will be available, and it'll be even better than ever. And then you can play LawBreakers on anything.
Yeah.
Maybe one day the Switch, who knows?
Unfortunately, the game never did release on Xbox, and Bleszinski recently admitted that the decision to choose PlayStation over Xbox was a bad one. Finally, once the game did release to less than stellar numbers, Bleszinski didn't seem to become any humbler, and pushed forward expecting the game to slowly gain the player base he was looking for. Along with that, when discussing the failure around LawBreakers' launch in an interview, he said, quote, "They're just looking for clicks, man. They're just looking for ad revenue. We're going to keep doing what we're doing, and they're welcome to print whatever they want. But as far as I'm concerned, they can f off. We're going to keep making our game for our fans." Now, Bleszinski is an excellent game designer, but he's also very stubborn. And despite all his talk about the death of the old guard, Bleszinski himself can be stuck in the past at times, and that fact is reflected in LawBreakers. From the initial decision to bring back the arena shooter genre, a genre that hasn't been popular since the early 2000s, to backing out of a free-to-play model and then charging fans for a game they thought was going to cost nothing, Bleszinski's decision-making at multiple key points in the game's development contributed heavily to the game's inability to survive in a saturated FPS market. Despite having a huge budget to make the game, LawBreakers just couldn't bring the arena shooter back into the public eye. And Boss Key Productions wasn't able to produce the billion-dollar franchise that Bleszinski hoped it could. The final nail in the coffin came with the rise of the Battle Royale genre, as games like PUBG, Fortnite, and several others became all the rage. With nothing going well, on September 14th, 2018, LawBreakers shut down its servers. While the game had its share of problems, from a bland art style to a shoddy online experience at times, the gameplay itself was always fun and really well made. Even 3 years after the end of the game, there continues to be a community of fans who discuss the game and hope that it'll be brought back in the future. Unfortunately, while Bleszinski still looks back on the game fondly, its assets are now owned by Nexon, the publisher of the game itself, and currently there doesn't appear to be any hope in sight of a revival for LawBreakers. And that's where the story ends. What started as a AAA title that managed to bring the exciting gameplay of arena shooters into modern times fell short due to bad timing and a lack of promotion. Maybe now that the genre has mellowed out on battle royales, LawBreakers could carve out its own place in the community much like Splitgate did. Unfortunately, despite all the good the game had going for it, it simply wasn't meant to be. As Bleszinski himself tweeted, quote, "It was a darned good game. Bad timing, uneven marketing, crowded market, etc. broke my heart. What are your thoughts on LawBreakers? Are arena shooters due for a comeback, or does the past stay in the past? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. This video is made possible thanks to our wonderful patrons. Massive thank you to everyone on this list, and shout out to Jason, B, Brendan, QB, Foxy, Mauve, Pachanas, Sierra, Shampoo, Weeaboo, Spartacus, and Yashichi for being platinum supporters. And an extra special shout out to Steven, Noodles, and Marco for being diamond supporters. Happy New Year! We're glad you're all still here. Check us out on Instagram, linked in the description. If you want to support our channel and get info on unreleased videos, check out our Patreon. If you want to help us out in a different way, leaving a like, subscribing, and hitting the bell to stay up to date is also appreciated. My name is Jonah. Thanks for watching.